Welcome to A Drop of Silence, the groundbreaking podcast series that dives deep into the realms of controversy. Join us as we bring special guests who share their extraordinary experiences and offer unparalleled insight into history, today's news headlines, and the future. Get ready to embark on a thought-provoking journey where silence speaks volumes and the truth lies somewhere beneath the surface.
What time will it be when war is no more? When bullets are melted and the warships moor?
My guest this week is Dr. Denis Mariernd. He's a naturopath. How I met Denis was about 15 years ago in a writer's critique with my friend Karen Kilbride and a couple of other people. And Denis was writing his memoir. And as we continued and we were, helping each other, I realized he was the victim of grooming and had taken it to court. He was the first person in Windsor to take his attacker to court. And he was a young guy in his 20s when he did it. And again, it was that thing that has plagued women our whole lives. He said, she said. Only this time it was adult, he said, and young man, he said. And it was a horrifying experience, and it has scarred Denis for the rest of his life. He leads a perfectly normal life, but those scars are deep inside of him. And he became a naturopath to help people. And he's one of those people who realizes his story needs to be told because people just don't believe that these terrible things happen. And in a city like Windsor. I hope you enjoy listening to Denis. Welcome to A Drop of Silence. I'm Pam Goldstein, the host of this series. And with me today is Dr. Denis Mariernd. Welcome, Dr. Mariernd. How are you doing today?
I'm well, Pam. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So now to describe Dr. Mariernd, he's a registered doctor of naturopathic medicine with a practice focus in mind-body medicine, ecopsychology, stress reduction, naturopathic oncology, and naturopathic palliative care. So how did you get into all of this kind of a thing before we go back into what I really want to talk about?
Well, the rest that followed after naturopathic doctor basically followed from being a naturopathic doctor. And my interest in end-of-life care came about. I was in first year of naturopathic college when I lost my oldest brother suddenly in a snowmobile accident. So it was the first significant death in my life at the time. So I did a lot of work around that and became more and more intrigued in working with people in end of life. That one of the tenets of naturopathic medicine is never palliate, always go for the cure by removing the treating the root cause and removing obstacles to cure. And I was a squeaky wheel in the back saying, but what about people in end of life? What do we do for them? And it really wasn't addressed much. So I did a lot more training and a lot more talking to other elders and other practitioners around the world, and basically initiated the practice of naturopathic palliative care. Started a clinic up at hospice here in Windsor back in 2008 for a while with a grant from the Green Shield Foundation of Canada, and had my therapy dog Dharma, who would come with me and visit with the patients in hospice as well too. The ecopsychology was when I was teaching at the time. I thought, well, if I'm going to be teaching, I might as well get a master's to be paid twice as much for teaching the same thing, and really became interested in ecopsychology, which is the newest branch of transpersonal psychology, looking at how is our body, mind, spirit, emotions affected by our relationship with the natural world.
Mhm.
So it was a very it fit in nicely. And then through that, becoming interested in Vision Quest and working with the indigenous communities, and therefore becoming a wilderness therapy guide, and now in the process of becoming an end-of-life doula as well
Wow.
too. So
Wow. The reason I asked you on the show, though, is a drop of silence is about people's rights being infringed and how people need to respect everybody's rights and fight for them. Because famous people like Einstein says the enemy is not the danger. The danger is when people turn their backs and they don't do anything about something horrible that they see. And you had something terrible happen to you as a teenager. And before we get into that, you have you're a homosexual, and that's where your trauma comes from, right? Or am
no,
I
I would not.
describing that wrong?
Yeah, I wouldn't
Vibe,
identify as a homosexual. I do identify as two-spirit.
two
Um,
spirits.
two-spirit, which means that I have both male and female spirit in one body. However, I was questioning my sexuality in high school. And I'd met a teacher when in grade 9 when I was 13 years old, and I was running for student parliament just to be the class representative. Got involved with student parliament, and through the years, by grade 11, I had become the dance committee chairman. And in grade 12, I was deputy prime minister. And then in grade 13 at the time, OAC, I was student council prime minister. So I met this man when I was 13 years old. And when I was 16 years old, he provided alcohol on his boat that I drank and got very drunk on, and sexually assaulted me when I was passed out, and tried to put some distance at the time between that event and that person, but it was really hard because I was still so active, and he was the teacher in charge of student parliament at the time as well too. So then there is another assault a few months later, again involving alcohol. There's a few more after that, and then when I was 18 years old, I made it very, very clear that that had to end, or else I was going to the police, and he never touched me again. But I felt I had to protect the secret for a while, for a long time, actually, afterwards, and for me, at least maintain a semblance of friendship with them. Because if I were to all of a sudden just, speak my truth, like I just couldn't risk anybody finding out. I was too ashamed.
Yeah. Um, for me as a psychiatric nurse, that poses like a major problem. Like there were signs all along the way that something was amiss, and I think that's what I would like you to address. Like when he first approached you, what was it what was it about him that drew you to him? I know the teacher that you're talking about, and I always hated his guts, but that's me. So I mean, I'm not gonna dwell on that, but other people really liked him. So let's look at this predator the way he should be looked at. How did he approach you? What made him semi-attractive to people?
Well, what attracted me to him, I believe, in the beginning, because I didn't find anything attractive about him personally. is that, in that very first full council meeting with all the student reps in early September, my brother had gone to that high school, and he knew one of my brothers from that high school, and from social events with him and whatnot. And he asked if I was so and so's little brother. And I said, yes. And he said, oh, I got your number. And, at the time, it felt good maybe to be singled out a little bit, but at the same time, it was, it didn't really, he wasn't the first teacher that asked me if I was this brother's little brother, put it that way. But he really took a shine to me. And my oldest brother that I was closest with, he had his own family by now, having his own boys, and we were spending less time together. And my dad was really busy at that time, trying to build his business, trying to buy the business from his brother. Was very rarely home. So through those years, I really was looking for adult male influence in my life. And I remember seeking that out from a priest at one point, who would do confessionals in his living room, until it got a little bit creepy for me and my radar started tingling, and I was like, okay, I'm done there. Luckily enough, he turned out to be a predator as well, too. So, your question is about what the attraction was. And I think that's the biggest part of grooming, is when a person in a position of power, and 90% of the time they are known to the family, takes a special interest in an at-risk youth. So this teacher knew that I wasn't getting a lot of adult male time at the point, and that my relationship with my father, especially during my teenage years, was like most typical teenage boys, I would assume, that had a workaholic father. And yeah, looking for that type of attention, and he would give it to me, and he kept showering it on me and saying things like, oh wow, you're really wise beyond your years. He was when the priest was really complimenting my looks, and then asked me to go on to on a cruise with him to assist him. That's when I went, okay, I'm out of here. This teacher took to really complimenting my leadership skills, my intelligence. There was always compliments.
Wow. So you mentioned the word grooming, and you hear it all the time nowadays. They talk about it on the news and everything. But what exactly is grooming?
Grooming is when a person in a position of power or authority singles out their victim, singles out their prey, and tries to build a special relationship with them by, as I mentioned earlier, building them up, building their self-esteem up, telling them, if it's a coach, saying, wow, your son is a really great hockey player. Let me spend some extra time with him to help train him. I think he's got a really good chance at the big leagues. Or even in the movie Spotlight, they showed how certain priests would take special interest in certain altar boys who came from broken homes. So grooming is the process of disarming not only the victim, but also the victim's family, so that their guardians learn to trust the predator. That's part of the MO. And it's not always males. 38% of abusers are female. Abusers of males are female as well, too. And invariably, it is somebody that is known and trusted to the family. So they really work not only just on the child to get their trust, but also on their parents to get, or guardians to get the trust of them as well, so that they can get alone time with the child.
Okay. Now, I know in psychiatric nursing, like every psychiatrist I knew, except for one, was not progressive, and they did not recognize grooming. And that process, they say, oh, there had to have been signs and stuff like that that people missed. Um, Looking back on it, were there any signs that were missed that if you were now with your experience, you would say, oh, this is what this guy's doing, or there weren't though, were there?
That's a challenging question. Yes, I think there were signs that were missed. There was a mistrust of this man, and as you knew, this man actually was known for having young males exclusively on his boat
Yeah.
and serving them alcohol. And that should have been a big red flag. I know my oldest brother pulled me aside at one point, in my later years when I was 17 or so, and questioned me in such a way that terrified me, because I knew if my brother found out that this had happened or was happening, that perpetrator would be very seriously injured, and my brother would be in trouble. And I was so ashamed to have let that happen. But the funny thing is, when we look back now, again, it was the mid 80s. But when I was asked to be a chaperone on the school band trip, even though I didn't belong to the band, but I was prime minister of the student council, so I counted as a chaperone, this teacher arranged for him and I to share a hotel room for the band trip. And I brought it up in the trial, they called the principal at the time, and he apparently did not remember the conversation him and I had, where he pulled me aside and asked me if I was okay with that arrangement, and not wanting to raise any flags or anything. I said, no, I'm fine with it. I mean, my girlfriend was on the band trip, but I knew he wasn't going to let me share a room with her. So, yeah, and even when I did tell a guidance counselor at one point, I was suicidal. I had self-harmed, and I alluded to problems, but I was too afraid to say too much. That guidance counselor told another guidance counselor who happened to have been that teacher's college roommate. And that teacher went to my perpetrator and said, you should stay away from Denis Marier. And later, the perpetrator put me up against a locker, and said, what did you say to so-and-so? And threatened me. I think that was the first time he threatened my life. He said, well, next time we're on the boat, I might just have to throw you overboard. And I just replied, well, I'm a lifeguard, idiot. Go ahead.
Yeah. So my question is that this was in the 80s, and a lot of information has come forth about the homosexual community and about grooming and incest and all of these terrible things that happen. Is there anything in place now that would have helped you back then?
A lot, the internet. There's a lot of resources now. There's a wonderful organization called 1in6.org, because the statistics used to be that it was 1 in 6 males have been sexually abused before the age of 17. It's now clearly 1 in 5, if not more. So there's resources online for people. There's people talking about it now, such as in my podcast. I would think online would have been a big lifesaver. At the time, I felt I was protecting the secret out of this loyalty to shame. It was what I call shame loyalty. Whether that ends up in the DSM-5 or not, But it's just so shameful. You couldn't tell anybody. I couldn't let anybody, not even my best friend knew, even though they started to see the effects of the grooming and the sexual abuse, such as the alcohol use, the drug use, the cutting behavior, the suicidal ideation, the isolating, the change in personality. I was exhibiting every hallmark that any teacher today, I would hope, would see and recognize immediately and intervene.
Yeah. So in today's society, though we're always 20 years behind, they're starting to teach sex education in grade school, and discussing things like, as the kids get older, discussing things like grooming and incest and all of those things that shouldn't be happening to kids by people they know. Do you think if you'd have had that education back in grade school and grade sixes and sevens and eights, that you would have been able to see this man as the perpetrator that he was? Or
Yeah, I really do believe so. And with the idea of proper touch, and like, sure, they showed us what, our working parts were and how they worked, but nowhere did anybody, they expected our parents to be the ones to say, don't you let anybody touch that. That's yours.
Mhm.
There was never any talk about what sexual abuse was or grooming.
So, looking at that, what exactly do you think needs to be taught in those grade school years then? Not so much the younger years. The younger years, like grade 1 and 2, they're just learning about their bodies. But I mean, as kids get older, I think starting in grade 5 is when I call it the years that my sons got stupid, and just they didn't know how to react to girls, kind of a thing. Is that an appropriate age to start talking about this sort of thing?
Well, yeah, one of the statistics I have here is approximately 20% of the victims of sexual abuse are under the age of 8,
Oh my gosh.
from Broward County. So starting when they get curious, and girls start puberty sooner than boys,
Oh, yeah.
right? So, I really do believe it needs to happen at home because of especially of the incidence of incest and 90% of sexual perpetrators being known to the victims of sexual abuse.
Yeah. It's it's such a difficult subject. I remember when one of my sons was in grade 7, and the Catholic schools and a lot of the public schools combined, because there was a droppage in students attending and everything. And there was a new girl in school, and she decided she liked my son's best friend, and was literally in the schoolyard forcing him to do things to show that she liked him. And he would come to my house so traumatized. It was unbelievable. And I remember calling the principal of the school and saying, I can't say anything because I'm breaching a confidentiality, but here's what's happening. And being a psych nurse, I said, this kid's a victim of incest. And I said, I can guarantee you this as a psych nurse. I can guarantee you this kid is a victim of incest. And the principal thought I was absolutely nuts until 2 days later, the mother dragged that little girl in and said, she's been raped. And we went to the doctor because she had a bladder infection and she's been raped, and we're blaming this boy. And the principal looked at me and she said, if you hadn't have warned me, I would have believed her. And it ended up being the father had been raping this little girl since she was
Yes.
7 years old. That's why I am so in, like, what are we missing in teaching kids about, who these evil people are, how they're approaching them. And and the big question is, would it have helped? Would it have helped you if you'd have been properly taught about this in grade school to stop it from happening?
We're familiar with stranger danger and teaching kids about that. But I think really it's about teaching kids about their own self-worth. And that is one of the hallmarks of survivors of sexual abuse, is a sense of worthlessness, and that they are just things to be used. So that all stems from from a very unhealthy view of themselves as playthings. And that instilling a sense of self-worth, including a respect for our boundaries, respect for our property, our bodies are our property. That really needs to be instilled early on, from the earliest age possible, in that nobody has the right to touch them in those places. Even especially family, or even family, however you want to phrase it. Okay, I know you take a bath with your sister and brother, but you're taking a bath, and that's fine. But I mean, those parts of your body are not playthings. They're to be respected. I don't have children myself, unfortunately. But that would be something that I would be teaching them right away, is that you need to know that you are empowered, to get this place of empowerment, giving them that power to say no.
Yeah.
Giving them those clear boundaries so that they can say no.
So then when you hit high school, I think a lot of the self-worth and idea the how kids feel about themselves is already in place. Should there be a continued education in high school as well?
I believe so. I definitely believe there's so much talk about it now that people are really opening up the topic. With all credit to the hashtag Me Too movement, that blew the lid off the topic, and now men are just starting to be able to feel comfortable enough to mention it. The topic is out there, and then in fact, when we talk about even online grooming, I forget where I do have a stat here, but it's like 80% of children are groomed online before the age of 18
That's
by the
crazy.
internet. So teaching, maybe it can be part of teaching proper internet skills. I'm not familiar with the current curriculum. I was a grade school teacher and a high school teacher myself in another life before I became a naturopath. But teaching them proper use of the internet as well, and what to watch out for.
Okay.
Yeah.
One of the other questions I have, because like I say, I was a psych nurse and I took care of a lot of kids who were victims of incest and grooming, and their self-esteem was non-existent even after they were told that this was a bad thing that happened to you and it's not your fault and blah blah blah. They still felt that it was, and they couldn't get over it. I still have patients who contact me on Facebook and said, "Do you remember me? My father raped me when I was 9 years old," and they still haven't gotten over it.
Mhm.
It's still affecting the way they view their lives and how they behave in their lives. Do you find that?
Oh, definitely, absolutely. Um, it's something that affects people for the rest of their lives, especially when their transgression, that their boundaries have been trespassed so horribly. And then even for some, it may start out as play, and it may be intriguing and whatnot, or it may even feel good. But just because a boy is aroused or a boy or girl has an orgasm doesn't mean that they wanted it. The bottom line remains is that they were sexually abused, especially by a person in a position of power. Here's another thing from the American Counseling Association. There is worse lasting emotional damage when a child's sexual abuse started before the age of 6 and lasted for several years. Among child and teen victims of sexual abuse, there is a 42% increased chance of suicidal thoughts during adolescence.
Wow. That's a horrible statistic.
Yeah.
So my next question then, and this is purely as a psych nurse, like, it's funny how that always comes into play for me. What, after this happened to you when you were, through your high school years, what could anybody have said or done for you that would have helped you get over this? Or not to get over it, but to accept it for what it is, not feel guilty about it, and to be able to continue on?
Yeah, there's still nothing that'll help me get over this. Although in the trainings that I do and the work that I do with survivors, the most important thing is for them to be believed, is to hear, I believe you. Secondly, I'm so sorry to have this happen to you. Thirdly, how can I support you?
Okay.
The most important by far needs to be, I believe you, because that is the most damaging aspect of being groomed and sexually abused. And then having the guts to finally tell somebody, to have them not believe them. I recently had a friend of mine who's 60 years old who revealed to his mother for the first time that he was sexually abused as a teenager by a man that she brought into the house and married.
Wow.
And her first response was, well, I don't believe you. Now, that is re-traumatizing in a way that I can't even imagine. So, I just need to be there for my friend in any way that I can be.
Yeah.
So, but definitely, I believe you. I'm sorry this happened. And it was not your fault.
Yeah.
Definitely number 3 is it was not your fault, especially when there was an imbalance of power, especially when they were groomed to the point that their defenses were lowered either through trust, through substances such as alcohol or drugs. But it was not their fault. They need to know it was not their fault. So I believe you. It was not your fault. I'm sorry this happened to you. How can I support you?
Yeah. So, is there anything society can do now to help besides education? Like, is there something, like if a kid comes to a teacher and says, "This is what's happening to me," or "I'm afraid," or whatever, what should be in place that isn't in place to stop this? Or is everything in place? It's just a matter of educating the kids.
It's really about educating the kids. Teachers are told from their training days they have a duty to report if they have any suspicion. So what needs to be in place for teachers is perhaps some more training and education around how to report, proper ways to report, but also there needs to be some trauma-informed counseling in place for the victims of grooming and sexual abuse. Trauma-informed counseling is a way to work with somebody so that they're still not perpetuating the feeling of shame and blame. So to be able to work with people who are brave enough. I wish I had one friend who told me afterwards she knew, because apparently I told her at some point in high school when I was drunk that it was happening, but she didn't know what to do, or she didn't know who to tell, so she never said anything. And she didn't tell me that until years later I thought, well, and I didn't blame her. She didn't have any resources.
Yeah. Yeah, that's my big fear is there aren't any resources that are in schools or any place where a kid could go. Like a young kid could go and say, my daddy's doing this to me. I don't see anything in place yet where they can do that.
Mm.
I don't think there is. And that's my big concern.
So you
So
suggest maybe even a hotline or something like that.
a hotline or just say maybe every school needs counselors available, and they talk to all the kids on a regular basis. I wonder if that might help because it is so rampant. There's another statistic that I don't think you have where 85% of the females in the world have been raped or
Mm.
sexually assaulted in some way. Well, that's like beyond a huge proportion. That's just crazy. And
Yeah.
yet it's acceptable. So
Yeah.
that's the kind of thing I worry about. Now, in
Well,
your, go
the
ahead.
stats, so I mean, and these are probably shifting as we speak. 1 in 3 girls are sexually abused before the age of 18. 1 in 5 boys are sexually abused before the age of 18. However, 30% of sexual abuse is never reported,
Yeah. Well, it was a lot more when I was
you
a
know?
teenager. It was like 90% of it was never reported. Only
Yeah.
6%, I think, was reported back then. So
Another
that's an
statistic,
improvement.
nearly 70% of all reported sexual assaults, including assaults on adults, occur to children age 17 and under.
Wow.
So of all of the reported sexual adults, sexual assaults, child and adults, 70% of those reported sexual assaults are for children 17 and under.
What the other thing that always came up in psychiatry was the people that did these things that it had happened to them, and therefore it was implanted in their brain, and they didn't stand a chance not to become that person that attacks people. Did you ever read anything about that, or is there any sense of that for you?
That's no, because that isn't true. Not everybody that's been abused will become an abuser. That's definitely false because there is a difference between a pedophile and somebody who's been abused. Now, a typical pedophile, the National Sex Offenses Registry says a typical pedophile will commit 117 sexual crimes in a lifetime.
Wow.
And they also say to remember that child abuse occurs at every socioeconomic level across ethnic and cultural lines within all religions and at all levels of education. But 95% of abuse is preventable through education and awareness. So 95% of this is preventable. So that's not condemning every person that has ever been sexually assaulted to become an abuser themselves.
Wow. So now in your practice, you do a lot of you help a lot of victims of assault, right?
Well, it's a practice focus. We do trauma-informed counseling
Yeah.
and yeah.
And if somebody wanted to come to you and talk to you about their experiences and receive treatment, how would they get a hold of you?
Well, I actually don't have a website. I'm kind of a dinosaur that way.
I don't
Or
have
I
a cell
do.
phone.
No, yeah. Here's a Tyrannosaurus talking to the Stegosaurus.
Yeah.
I do have an email address, and it is drdenismariernd, all one word, Dennis with one N. So DRDENISMARIERND @gmail.com.
Okay.
That would probably be the best way to get a hold of me directly.
Okay. That's great. Well, thanks so much, Dr. Marier, for coming on and talking about this. It's such an important topic, and I hope that you'll come on again as more research comes out, and because we need to talk about it so much more.
Mhm. Well, Pam, thank you for having me, and thank you for creating such a safe container for me to be able to talk about my own experiences, because it is still hard, and
Yeah,
especially knowing that, this is going out into the world, right?
yeah.
So I really appreciate your kindness and compassion and your friendship throughout the years as well too. So
Okay.
thank you.
So we'll talk again soon. Thank
Very
you.
soon.
What time will it be when war is no more? When bullets are melted and the warships moor.
This podcast is brought to you by Unbreakable Bindings Publishing Company. Executive produced by Lori Baldassi, produced by Ryan Richardson, hosted by Pam Goldstein.